Welcome to the St Andrews Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Yeah.
The motion that stands before the House this evening is that this House believes that Scotland's geopolitical influence is growing. We are joined by some excellent speakers tonight, Cleo Davies on the proposition side and Bess Rhodes on the opposition side. Before we begin the debate, I invite the training officer to read last week's minutes in the style of future President of Independent Scotland, Lorraine Kelly.
What a weekly one. I just gotta say, I'm a wee bit more stressed running this country than I thought I was. Getting over the border, I wish he'd do his walls a bit taller.
I don't know what's more upsetting, Lorraine Kelly's descent into authoritarianism or the fact that we're missing her daytime TV shows.
Counterpoint. I think we should really ask not what Lorraine Kelly can do for us, but what we can do for Lorraine Kelly.
Excellent. There seems to be some disagreement in the House. We'll have to take a vote by oral acclamation. Ooh. All those in favour of taking the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Seems rather close. I must consult with my sergeant, who seems to be further away than usual this week. Yeah. The minutes are taken as read.
Resign!
Of course she would say that. And without any further ado, I give the call to the first proposition speaker to give their address defending the motion that stands in their name. Hey, hey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, for understanding with clarity what is happening, and for making sure that Scotland is in fact a leader, and we are very grateful to you for that. Those are the words of John Kerry. He's now the Special Envoy of the President of the US for Climate, and he's speaking in Edinburgh in August of 2023 at an event that was organised by Beyond Borders Scotland and the Scottish Council on Global Affairs. He is speaking about Scotland's record as a leader on climate change. Scotland has shown climate leadership and it's been a key part of the Scottish Government's geopolitical influence since the mid-2000s. We'll remember Alex Salmond's leadership around the COP in Copenhagen, discussion in the wake of the Scottish Government Act 2009, when they introduced 42% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. Sorry. Another one. This is Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, and he's speaking on a BBC radio programme just in the fringes of the COP26 in Glasgow, 2021. Scotland has very clear targets of reaching net zero before 2050. Scotland is one of the first international actors that has determined loss and damage. That is a very important point for developing countries. I would like to start by saying how much I appreciate the Scottish efforts in this regard. Now again, how a country is perceived matters in international affairs. And it matters that countries like the United States or that the UN Secretary General should consider Scotland a leader on one of the biggest challenges of this century. Now you may say, right, Cleo or Dr. Davies, international relations is not the same as geopolitics. And you would be right, of course. Geopolitics is about a country's geography, its history, its culture, and how that is situated in the political dynamics that shape international relations. And in the constellation that is emerging now, in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I've mentioned climate change already, and many other challenges today, geopolitical significance is growing for Scotland. And here I turn to two very recent reports from the House of Commons. The notes. First, the Scottish Affairs Committee published a report, July 2023, Defence in Scotland, the North Atlantic and the High North. in which, and I quote, Scotland's geography means that it has a particularly important role in meeting defence and security objectives in the North Atlantic and the High North. The UK is not an Arctic state, but Scotland's proximity to the region means it shares concerns and interests with Arctic allies. Scotland is also a natural location in which to base military assets tasked with operating in the region. And historically, this has indeed been the case. The second report, published in October 2023, is from the Environmental Audit Committee, the UK and the Arctic environment, in which we can read, the dual drivers of climate change and increasing international tensions are leaving the geopolitics of the Arctic region in flux. This is something that the Scottish government has realised as a geopolitical concern for a few years now. It has invested its own resources in creating an Arctic unit and is keen to engage with the states of the Arctic Council. The UK government, on the other hand, is lagging behind, hence the reports from the committees in Parliament. Now, you would say, now Cleo, fine, but geopolitical significance does not mean geopolitical influence, does it? And again, I would say, you are right. Geopolitical, and this is where I've lost my way with my notes, which is inevitably going to happen, shades of Boris Johnson, but I won't mention Peppa Pig, because that is not based in Scotland, so it is irrelevant to the debate today. Geopolitical, yeah. Sorry. Now, you might say geopolitical significance is not the same as geopolitical influence, and again, you would be right. Geopolitical influence is the capacity to think strategically about one's own geopolitical significance and act accordingly. Now, I have already mentioned Scotland's strategic thinking and action on climate change. It is strategic, and I want to underline here, this is not just a government trying to make a point that it is significant because of political motives and posturing. It is a strategic understanding of the role of devolved and regional authorities in delivering the pledges and the targets that governments are signing up to in international agreements. And that is why Scotland has committed to building alliances with regional governments, authorities around the world, and chairs an alliance of over 130 regional authorities on delivering on climate change. I want to turn, as we finish, to the biggest geopolitical threat for Scotland, which is the decision by the UK to withdraw from the United Kingdom, from the European Union. And here, I argue that Scotland has been much more effective than the UK in projecting a coherent brand and foreign policy story since Brexit, precisely because it has a much clearer strategic understanding of its own strengths and weaknesses. It has understood that it must rely on building alliances and that it must work much, much harder to project its voice and its interests outside of Scotland. Something that the country it relies on to promote its own interests, the UK, does not do effectively for its own self or for Scotland. Now, this has taken a very concrete form where it has recruited excellent civil servants, usually poached from the UK Foreign Office, who now serve for the Scottish Government in External Affairs. It has opened new branches in various European member states. It has a branch in Dublin. It has an office in Paris. Brussels, that has existed since 1999, a beautiful view onto the European Commission. and Copenhagen and Dublin. Mentioned Dublin already. And it will be opening an office in Warsaw. This goes along with its offices in Washington and in Beijing. And the purpose is to project Scotland's reputation, enhance its reputation, attract investments, have a say in international trade, promote research and innovation, and Scotland's interests with the EU. Scotland, and here I'm quoting, I don't have the quote, pardon me. Scotland has a unique brand. It is an appreciated and liked country across the world. But what makes it a geopolitical, what gives it growing geopolitical influence is not necessarily the fondness people have for whiskey, golf, or indeed the skirts, the kilts. What makes it what gives it the growing geopolitical influence it has is that it has a very clear strategic understanding of what its strengths and limitations are and what it requires for it to pursue its interest in the world, and also puts the capacity, whether it's the civil service, mobilizes the universities and the businesses to promote its interests around the world.
I thank the speaker for their excellent address, and I'll cross the floor and give the call to the opposition speaker to give their address and begin the case for the opposition bench. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honour to join you this evening, and may I begin by congratulating the members of this House on being part of what I firmly believe is the finest university in the bonniest land in the world. Yet, being a wonderful country is not necessarily the same as being an influential country. And this evening I will argue that Scotland's geopolitical influence is currently limited and will probably decline in the future. I'm going to use a rather more brutal definition of geopolitics than the speaker on the other side. I am going to suggest that opening offices and having nice ideas about pleasant things that we want to do together does not equate to geopolitical power, and use much more brutal ideas about population, about guns, about money, and I'll finally possibly touch a little bit on culture at the end. So why do I think that Scotland's geopolitical influence is not growing? Let's begin with population. I'm sorry to say it, but size matters. As we all know, Scotland is a relatively small country. In terms of population, it's about 120th in the global rankings of the world's largest countries. We have a population of about 5 million here in Scotland, a figure that is not that dissimilar to the population of Liberia. Yet, whilst Liberia's population is predicted to grow significantly over the next 30 years, potentially reaching about 8.8 million in 2050, Scotland's population is expected to still be about 5.4 million by the middle of this century. Scotland isn't just a small country, it's a country where population growth has largely stalled. And this matters. The size of our population has a bearing on the influence we can exert militarily, economically, and culturally. Let's consider the military aspect. It's a deeply unpleasant fact that military might often delivers political influence. And whilst we might be located in the geographically significant strategic location, we have not fulfilled the potential that this country has, and I see little sign that we will. In 1938, Mao Zedong declared that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, and this message has been taken to heart by the Chinese Communist Party. Today, the People's Republic of China has over 2 million active military personnel and a further 1 million reservists. Scotland could never hope to rival such figures. In 2011, there are only 1.5 million people in Scotland between the ages of 18 and 40, roughly the age group you might consider for military service. The UK as a whole currently has only 152,000 full-time military personnel. Of these troops, just over 10,000 are based in Scotland. The UK government is proposing to reduce slightly the size of our armed forces. And despite extensive searching on the SNP's website, the plans of the SNP for the defence policy of an independent Scotland are spectacularly unclear. However, there is little indication that the SNP would vastly increase the size of the armed forces. So to just give you a bit of context, a military of slightly above 10,000 people, assuming that we retain the same number of troops in an independent Scotland, is roughly equivalent to the size of such noted militaries as those of Kyrgyzstan and Malawi. The possession of a sizable military gets attention. Without his arsenal of nuclear weapons and tank collection, Vladimir Putin would be another guy with a midlife crisis. Now, Putin has unfortunately been actively using the Russian military. But even if your troops are not deployed beyond your borders, the knowledge that a country has a powerful military often brings it influence. Latent military power gets countries a hearing. And as we've in many ways heard, recent events indicate that this military aspect to international affairs may have an even greater importance in the future. Yet it's a type of power that, rightly or wrongly, Scotland and the wider UK have largely given up. Yet violence, actual or threatened, of course isn't the only way to get geopolitical influence. Money also talks. In the words of Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, it's the economy, stupid. Of course, these words don't entirely apply to this august gathering. Surely no St Andrews student is ever stupid, I hope. The idea that the economy matters is a valid one. In global terms, Scotland doesn't have a large economy, an inevitable result of the size of our country. If we include Scotland's share of North Sea oil, we have a total GDP of £211 billion, so around $260 billion US. This makes us about the 48th largest economy in the world and roughly similar in size to the economy of Iraq. Incidentally, Iraq's GDP is growing by about 7% each year. Last year, Scotland's growth was just under 5%. As I stated, these GDP figures include North Sea oil, which is of course a finite and diminishing resource. If we look at the Scottish companies with the largest annual turnover, the list is also not completely reassuring. None are major global businesses. In the top 5, we have 2 energy companies, as well as the insurers Aviva and the Bank of Scotland and the Royal Bank of Scotland, both of which have had to receive major government bailouts within the last 20 years. Of course, if we are thinking of geopolitics, international trade is significant. Yet Scotland's biggest trading partners are the other nations within the United Kingdom. Even prior to Brexit, around 60% of Scotland's export trade was with the rest of the UK. Recent research conducted by Professor Ross Brown at our own university shows that only a small minority of Scottish companies export. Among Scottish SMEs which do trade internationally, typically less than a quarter of turnover is from exports. Scottish exports are also concentrated in a small number of global markets. Outside of the UK, Scotland's biggest trading partner is the USA, and whisky is quite a big factor here. By the way, people quite often put the EU together as a bloc, but if you split the EU up, the USA is by far greater trading than with any individual EU country. But whilst America is important to our economy, we are, frankly, pretty irrelevant to Americas. Even with whisky, which is a significant part of our trade with them, they could revert to Bourbon, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to say it. In no country outside of the UK does Scotland make the sort of economic contribution that would bring it genuine influence. Other countries might like consuming smoked salmon and whisky, though I suggest not together, but they are not going to redesign their national priorities around the wishes of the nation that provides their after-dinner drinks and canapé toppings. Now, as high-minded individuals, you may feel that all this talk of money and trade is rather vulgar. Instead, it's our cultural influence that matters. And certainly the Scottish Government believes that, stating in many ways, as we've heard, that Scotland has a distinct international brand and identity. I think this is true up to a point. A lot of people do have an image in their mind of Scotland, one which often has a lot of cliches in it, about kilts and castles and the Loch Ness Monster. Yet the extent to which these popular images reflect an actual understanding of Scotland's past or present is debatable. They often owe a lot more to Braveheart, Outlander and Harry Potter than they do to the reality of Scotland. And frankly, I fear that most millennials could name more staff at Hogwarts than they could current members of the Scottish Cabinet. Maybe, now, ironically, the extent of international ignorance about Scotland was brought home to me by a collaborative European Union research project. At the end of the project, we all attended a conference and a dinner, and at this dinner, one of our collaborators expressed sincere surprise that Scotland used to be an independent country. He'd never realised this. As a Scottish historian, I was just recovering from this shock when a Scandinavian researcher made the still more remarkable comment, "Glasgow, is that a Scottish city? I always thought it was in England." Now, maybe you feel that such a lack of awareness about a country is experienced by all nations, but I'm not quite sure. I feel, could you raise your hands if you know an important thing that happened on the 4th of July 1776? You can think of an important document. Can you raise your hands if you can think of an important document which was signed on the 6th of April 1320? One, I'm so happy. Okay, it's the Declaration of Arbroath, really, really important document in Scottish history. I think that shows you something about the two nations' relative soft power. Perhaps you feel this is all, I'm just closing, this is all downbeat. But in my final moments, I want to reassure you that geopolitical influence isn't all it's cracked up to be. America has more billionaires than any other country, and it has the largest total GDP of any nation. Yet it's also an incredibly unequal state. There's a very limited correlation between total GDP and between the distribution of wealth within a society and the overall global influence. Scotland has the advantage of having quite a limited overall GDP, but in terms of the wealth per head of the population, we actually look much better. So what can we learn from this? Scotland does not have the resources to change the world, and an excessive focus on geopolitics will distract ministers and squander resources. But what we might do is have the resources to improve the lives of most Scots if we could use our wealth more fairly and effectively here. Thank you very much, shutting up.
Speaking for the excellent address, and thank you to all speakers for the fantastic debate so far. It's now time to open the debate up to the floor. If you catch the chair's eye, please raise your hand. Speeches will be up to 3 minutes in length, and I'll bang my gavel once your time has expired. The best floor speech will also receive a prize, and it will be determined by myself and the sergeant. So, any speeches from the floor? Yes, state your name for the minutes.
My name's Graham. Do I have to say my last name?
No.
I'm curious, like, for the opposition, because most of your arguments seem to be reasons as to why Scotland is small or insignificant now, but not reasons as to why it's not going to become significant in the future. So if the Scottish economy is small, if there's limited exports, if there's limited whatever, why does that not mean it's going to get bigger in the future? I would think, if anything, the opposite is true, that like if something is small now, it's more likely to get bigger than smaller going forward. And then I'm also curious about, because the examples you give of comparisons to a country like Scotland or like Iraq or whatever, or like generally very arid and dry and hot countries, I'm wondering about like Scotland's like geography, not necessarily in a military context, but more in an environmental one. Because surely as the climate becomes hotter and hotter and also drier and drier as a result of climate change, there's going to be more demand and more people wanting to live in cold countries like Scotland, but also countries that are like wet and have access to fresh water. Which I think makes Scotland a fine candidate, especially given that most countries and most places around the world where it's very cold and very wet, you're looking at moving to like the north of Russia, which is like very underdeveloped and there's very little space. Surely Scotland's like an optimal place where there's like some development happening already, but still lots of free land to build forward on.
Another fine floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Yeah, the opposition talked about how insignificant Scotland is in the grand scheme of things. However, if we look at, for example, countries like Singapore, it's an anomaly. A nation that was founded on complete nothingness, in a sense, but had one great leader, Lee Kuan Yew, and that led the nation and built it from literally a state of farmers into now one of the most civilized and technologically advanced nations in the world. And I don't understand how Scotland could not achieve any of these sort of achievements as Singapore did. It's strategically very significant. Its trading partners are extremely powerful in the world order, in a sense. And if you also look at, for example, countries like Switzerland, which I'm also partly from, these countries are also geographically very significant. And although you might say that, of course, they had their gold reserves from the Nazis and from World War II, the banking sector was their way of getting into the world and finding their position even as a small nation. Therefore, I just want to address the opposition that the point they're trying to make doesn't really make sense to me at all. Thank you.
Sorry, please state your name for the minutes, please. Sorry, the speaker who just spoke, please state your name for the minutes. Sorry.
Martin.
Thank you. Great. I thank the member for their flying floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Bess. I would like to challenge some of the ideas that have been proposed just now, just purely on a geopolitical, power-based world where we live. And it seems quite apparent to me that Asia has been rising a lot more in power over the past decades due to population growth, but also due to incredible economic growth. And Scotland, but also the entire United Kingdom, has only declined in power since the Second World War, I would say. And the idea that they will grow further, I think, is quite, well, it will grow in relation to the rest of the world. It seems dubious to me, as I see the power in Asia increase more, especially India. And I don't see how Scotland, even though they have great climate aspirations, great stuff, I don't see how they are gonna, just for these factual power-based systems, improve.
Another member for their fine floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes.
Yeah, it's perhaps quite a technical argument, and it's mainly just inspired by yours, which is that I think that the only way that I would believe that Scotland's geopolitical influence is increasing is if its political influence within the UK is increasing, and therefore it has a greater influence sort of through that chain geopolitically. Because I think I find it quite hard to believe that Scotland actually has any geopolitical influence when it still sits within the UK. Because I think that anything that exists within like Scotland's dynamic relationships with other people are private enterprises, or are things that are like done by the Scottish government that aren't fully taken seriously for all of the reasons that the opposition has outlined. But I do think that Scotland's significance within the structures of the United Kingdom has been increasing, and I can see it continuing to do so as we continue to have pretty incompetent government. So I think that in that sense, the investments that Scotland makes in things like environment policy or the education shifting that happens within Scotland that then gets carried through to England and the rest of the UK, I can see probably being a greater and more persuasive argument as to why that might necessarily cause the increasing geopolitical significance of Scotland.
I'd like the honourable member for her floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes.
My name is Simon. In February of this year, I was asked whether I supported Rangers or Celtic. That isn't a notable question for Scots to receive in Scotland, nor really in Britain, and maybe not even in Europe. But I was not asked this in Europe, I was asked this in rural Honduras. I think that is notable. I think that proves Scottish cultural exports hold sway across the world. Scottish universities are topping the rankings, as we all well know. Scottish demographics, young people today in Scotland who overwhelmingly supports independence and rejoining the EU, points to a future with a Scottish seat at the table in Europe, something that Britain does not and probably will not have for decades to come, which is going to give us more of a voice than we currently have outside of Europe, outside of any relevant regulatory body when it comes to addressing threats like AI or like responding to geopolitical actors like Russia or China. I think because of that, Scotland's influence is only set to grow.
Their final floor speech and the speeches from the floor. Yes.
Hello. Excuse me. I'm Alistair. So the opposition speaker said that people don't really pay that much attention to the specifics of Scottish culture, and I think this is probably like broadly true. But I'm also not sure that like if they were looking at Scotland's culture and particularly its political culture right now, it would look so great anyway. Like I do accept the point about climate change, but I think there's some low-hanging fruit about things that are not so great about the Scottish political culture in the status quo. Right, we have now a succession of first ministers of the like 6 that we've had who have been embroiled in criminal scandals. One obviously much more serious than the other, but you know. And a party as a whole that is leading the country that is embroiled in scandals of corruption, of problems in governance, in terms of education, in terms of their ability to deliver on promises. We have a political culture that is hamstrung by constant division over the issue of independence, which is partly why the political, I think that there's a lack of accountability to the state itself, but also in terms of the, you know, declining, right? I don't support independence, and I was never a huge fan of the SNP, but there was a time when it looked like Scotland maybe would become an independent country. And you know, I'm not sure that Scotland would do great in that, but at least in what Cara said, like it would be a country that would be able to stand for itself. But this did not happen, and it looks like it is not going to happen. The Scottish government is being like pushed away, and I think this doesn't make your country look very strong. It looks like you are the country who keeps not getting the things you want. You don't get independence. You don't get the EU even though you want it, and you have a country that is internally divided over these issues, and yet not really achieving anything on them. And like it's also probably worth mentioning on the point about Rangers and Celtic. Like, yeah, there's an influence of Scottish football, but there's also some other quite bad associations with Rangers and Celtic and its effect on Scottish culture in terms of things like sectarian violence. I think that there are many problems with the Scottish culture, like political culture, and we shouldn't like just paint a rosy picture, even if it is probably true that realistically, I'm not sure exactly how much effect this has on the international perception of Scotland.
Of their floor speech. Any other speeches on the floor? Yes, state your name for the minutes.
Hi, my name is Lee. I would like to bring some nuance from a demographical viewpoint. I think I would like to back up the opposition in the sense that size does matter, and we know that the population in Scotland is shrinking, such as the other Western countries, like the Nordic countries and Western Europe, but also China. And China is super scared of this. This is why they changed from a one-child policy to a two-child, or in rural areas, more than 2 children. And so I think the population is super important, because if you want to create wealth, or you want to create, and this is a little bit of a material take, but I think the economical power is very important if you want to have an influence, and if you want to be an important player in the world trade. But you need labor force, and for labor force you need people, and you need children, and you need, you need and positive, or you need, but you need babies to be born. That's what I'm trying to say. Or what I could see, how Scotland could be an influential stakeholder in world economy, the geopolitical sphere is that we have an active migration policy, which one would solve the labor issue because they would have an influx of people from all over the world, which could be a good thing since there's climate change and it's quite drastic. And then also I think it could be some type of role model to other countries showing that this active migration policy is not a bad thing.
The full speech and the speeches from the floor. Yes, state your name for the minutes.
My name is George, and I'd just like to make a brief point about energy. The speaker mentions that the resources that Scotland has in the North Sea, oil and gas, are finite and dwindling, and that is absolutely true. And in the coming decades, they will become more and more irrelevant. However, it's also very noteworthy that Scotland has enormous potential for renewable energy in North Sea and so offshore and onshore as well, particularly with wind farms, but also the coast around the UK has very high tides compared to most of the rest of the world. So there's enormous potential, at least in these two areas, not so much with solar power. And so this surely will give Scotland greater geopolitical influence in the future as an energy producing nation, as an energy exporting nation, particularly as the world generally becomes much more reliant on electricity rather than other forms of energy to drive cars, to heat homes, in ways that we don't do at the moment. And so it seems inevitable that at least on the energy side, Scotland's geopolitical influence is at least not going to shrink as the resources in the North Sea dwindle and have potential to grow.
The fine floor speech, the speeches from the floor. Yes.
Freddie, I think kind of want to comment on some of the floor speeches I've heard. I think some of the floor speeches have seemed to imply that Scotland simply can increase its influence if it finds its niche, if it becomes a Switzerland or a Singapore or any other very unique and very specialised country. But I don't know what that niche is for Scotland. The SNP, who are, if any party is going to run Scotland for the foreseeable future, it would be them, have not offered a particular thing that Scotland would specialise itself in such a way. Europe already has enough tax havens and offshore countries that I don't think we need another one, which is kind of what Switzerland and Singapore are effectively, and that's why they've done so well. I don't know where Scotland could go, and then the other niche that has been offered is its energy. But I think there's a fundamental problem with some of the views on Scottish energy and how it would work. I think, first of all, Scotland might become a world leader in the production of renewable energy, but first of all, the United Kingdom is already being outstripped in its production capacity by the United States and by China, and also in its investment by the European Union. Scotland will grow, but not at the pace of those other powers. And secondly, you can't put wind in a barrel. You can make a lot of money off of sending oil around the world, but you can't ship renewables in that same way. The energy that Scotland would export would be electricity to England and maybe some of the Nordic states. That isn't power. That's just a small amount of influence in an area that Scotland already has some. So I don't think Scotland would have the niche to put itself above where it is already punching in the world.
The fine floor speech and the speeches from the floor. I think we'll stick to one full speech per person, but one full speeches always. Yes, stay your name for the minutes.
Hi, Ines. So there's just one slight argument in regard to the whole economic thing of Scotland that's been a little bit put behind. Is that the fact that it is an Arctic near country, and the number one thing that China and Russia are looking at right now is the Arctic. So if you look at what China's producing right now, they're putting out hundreds of icebreakers because they know that the new trading routes are going to be up north. On top of that, with the current political unrest that's happening in the Middle East, the Canal Suez is at danger of constantly being, having problems like we had a few years back with a boat completely blocking out the entire thing. The Nordic route is the easiest route, and if we get Scotland to be a world leader on that, that could be its niche. I mean, you know, we would probably be competing with Russia and China, but Scotland would be the European power that has access to the Arctic circles. So we have to keep that in mind when saying that Scotland doesn't have economic power at all. Thank you.
Well done for your speech. I think we just have maybe time for one or two more. Yes, please state your name for the minutes.
I would like to comment on the whole idea of Scotland finding its own niche in how it can influence the geopolitics of the world. There are two backgrounds to be given to my assessment. The first one being that, well, I personally believe that the world has been on the, frankly, happy trajectory of the decrease of global violence used ever since the end of the Second World War, which was specifically promoted by the fairly difficult to arrange system of international agreements and international law. It is a system which we currently and very actively see collapse with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing also Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as many other issues which you're probably aware of, which is extremely concerning. On the other hand, we have a background of Scottish influence, which I would argue have been heavily leaning on soft power. Historically for Scotland, there are many notable economists, philosophers, and engineers and writers coming from Scotland specifically. There are probably other disciplines which I'm less educated about. Scotland is currently in a very unique predicament, but it clearly strives to have some sort of say in international affairs, as proposition identified with the increasing amount of foreign offices being open. I think it's a very important metric. But at the same time, I do agree with the position that Scotland lacks the religious fanatism of North Korea to compensate with extremely mighty military while having a very small budget. It lacks the very vast reaches of Netherlands to become the specialist in aircraft warfare within a very complex data system, and frankly it does lack agency of conducting and projecting the hard power on international scale by the fact that Scotland does not have full control of its foreign affairs. And I think that given the very, not just intellectual, but given the amount of vast human capital Scotland possesses and actively attracts currently, I think it might find specialization, another background to give that with Russian invasion of Ukraine, a country like Sweden, which actively supported Vietcong during the Vietnam War because it believed in values of people receiving medical aid over geopolitics, is currently actively seeking NATO membership, which is an alliance with the United States. We have the niche for neutral countries in the international stage, which focus on the law-based international order as opposed to the military strengths-based one. And since Scotland is denied an opportunity to project hard power, I think Scotland might end up focusing on how the soft power projection can occur, which may be specialization and frankly something we need desperately right now as a planetary community. I think I might finish talking on this because it was right well, but that was me.
Thank the speaker for the final speeches. Sorry, no. Okay, we'll go move forward. So it's now time to bring the debate back to the dispatch boxes. So each speaker has 10 minutes to give their reply, and we'll go in reverse order. So I'll start with the opposition bench speaker to give their reply first. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Those fascinating contributions. Thank you. Many of them very thoughtful indeed. I want to respond to starting off with the question of climate change, which I think is a very interesting and important question. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking about climate change. There's an assumption, oh, we're in a slightly cooler country. It's wonderful. With climate change, we'll become a more attractive destination. I don't know whether any of you noticed, we did have some quite bad weather recently, and it wasn't that fun. And one of the things that's often associated with climate change is actually increasing instability in weather conditions. So we can be expecting more storms when we're not alone not communicating with Scandinavia or France or wherever. We probably struggle to get down to Edinburgh because the Falls Bridge will be shut at this rate. So I think we've got to be very careful what we wish for with climate change. Also, frankly, quite a lot of the developed, if I say quite a lot of the urban centres of Scotland are in the more lower lying levels, and I honestly recommend you go and look at a floodplain map of Scotland and then think about global sea levels rising by about 1 metre, and I get very worried. So I don't think climate change is working in our favour. So a lot of people are optimistic about energy, and it is true that energy has been an important part of the Scottish economy traditionally. The point that the gentleman made, though, about barrels of oil being very easy to sell long distance, whereas frankly it's quite hard to store energy from tidal, energy from wind power, and then transmit it across the globe. This is not a thing that is easy to trade, so I don't think we can think it's a total solution. I also would point out to you that frankly, just about every country round about the North Sea does have a bit of wind. So I don't think they might decide to put their own wind turbines up, possibly. Okay, moving on, starting with the depressing, moving to the even more depressing. I do honestly think we live in dangerous times, and I think, brutally, the fact that in a lot of Europe, for very understandable and very laudable ethical reasons, we have neglected military power, probably means that we're going to have a pretty brutal comeuppance at some point in the not too distant future. And I think that's very tragic, and I don't want it to happen. But I think it's a possibility that just relying on soft power isn't going to get us very far. I think I would also like to suggest that I'm afraid, as a historian, and I haven't spent that much time talking about history, but I will spend a little, you can see trajectories in society. You can look at patterns of population growth. You can look at patterns of economic growth. You can also, frankly, just see when governments get a bit messy and aren't really doing their job. And the brutal fact is, I think that probably the continent of Europe is in decline. Certainly the United Kingdom is decline. And I think that Scotland, for very many reasons, is so inextricably linked to the United Kingdom that whether it is independent or whether it is part of the UK, if the rest of the British Isles goes down the pan, Scotland's kind of screwed. And I don't think the direction of travel is cheering. And I'm sorry about that. And one of the sad things is that I feel that rather than addressing the big problems, the problems of how we save this planet and don't destroy this remarkable natural resources that surround us, the problems of how we don't cause World War III, the problems of how we actually ensure that everyone in this country is properly fed, properly clothed, is warm enough. I'm afraid we're not really addressing them, and I see very little sign that any of our political parties are going to properly address them. Instead, so many parties, with their different perspectives, have torn themselves apart with arguments about constitutions, which I think are fundamentally a distraction. I think the argument about the EU was bitterly divisive. There might have been good things on both sides, but it has divided people. It was distraction from fundamentally addressing food, from addressing our security, from addressing the safety of this planet. And I think if we continue discussing the constitutional structure of the United Kingdom, at the end of the day, that's a distraction from the big things that matter. So I want to say, I'm really, really sorry. I do think the future is not cheerful. And I think if Scotland pins its hopes on a geopolitical grandeur, it'll be even worse. I think our best chance as Scotland is to try and make as good a life for every individual who lives in this nation. And I do think we might have the resources to be able to do that. So I suggest to you that if you want a healthier Scotland, a better educated Scotland, a more equal Scotland, we should focus on those core aims. focus on helping citizens of this country and not chase post-imperial dreams of geopolitical grandeur. Instead, vote for what is realistic, vote for what is local, and can I say vote for realism, vote for Scotland, vote with the opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, opposition speaker, for excellent reply, and I pass the floor to the call to the opposition speaker to give their reply in the final speech of this debate. Hear, hear.
Well, I mean, I'll put it out there. I do not subscribe to declinist, even deterministic narratives that are somewhat derived from historical trajectories and so on. I believe in politics. And I believe in the fact that despite the challenges, and they are great, and that is precisely why Scotland has not sold a dream about its geopolitical influence, but it has engaged upon one of the biggest topics of this century, yes, this century, on climate change, and it is engaged on it because it has the power to, because it is a devolved competence, right? And it is engaged upon it knowingly that if those oceans rise, it will be affected. The idea that the answer would be a parochial, inward-looking one, as an answer to a picture that was presented of a doomed planet, well, is one thing. But that's by the by. I shall address first, let's go back to the wording of the motion. The wording of the motion is Scotland's geopolitical influence is growing. I am not speaking in defence of a Scottish geopolitical power. Military power, hard power, economic power or financial tax haven. By the way, being a tax haven and an offshore country, offshore tax haven does not make you a geopolitical actor. Possibly it makes you a geopolitical topic. Right? Yeah? So that's the one thing. We are trying to assess whether Scotland's geopolitical influence is growing. It might be going from nothing. Nothing. And it might be a little bit of growth. That is what we're assessing, not whether it has the potential to become a geopolitical power. Now, I would like to address that, and I will speak in favour or take up a couple of points that were picked up. Most of the comments have been in favour, or that have been against this motion, or have voiced some doubts, have focused on very, very hard, on numbers, on GDP. And geopolitical influence, ask the Norwegians, the Swedes were mentioned too, is not only about hard power, it is also about soft power. And Scotland, and this is where I'm going to tread in very difficult waters, even Scotland's divisive politics, even this banging on about the Constitution and the independence referendum, actually, when you think of it, when you think of Catalonia, you think of, well, demonstrations on the street. When you think of the Basque Country, you think of, terrorism. When you think about independence movements, Scotland is a beacon of hope. It is a model. It's not there, and it may never get there. But the fact that that debate is possible is something that is picked up on all corners of the globe, and not only in China or in the US, who frankly really do not care about what small regions or smaller regions of the corner of their continents would want for their own political self-determination. Yeah. So that kind of is noticed. It's noticed across the world that there can be a peaceful way for debating this, and even towards an independent country. Another point is on size matters. Yeah. Now here, Stephen Gethin's book is excellent on diaspora. And he speaks of how the Irish, their entire diplomacy, and it's a neutral country, Ireland, it's a neutral country, but it has built its entire diplomacy around soft law and also its diaspora. Right? Anyone? Yeah? Joe Biden? Out there, snubbing the British Prime Minister, weighing in on the political debate over Brexit because of his ancestry, because of his Irish ancestry. And the British government tearing its hair out, thinking, how did the Irish outwit us on this one? Well, that's influence. Unless, and this is my last point, you argue that, well, does it matter? The UK is declining anyways. We're all going down, yes. But I will argue that the UK still has geopolitical influence. You've only got to look at how the Baltic states are really keen for their support around Russia. The French, they even have to put up with the Brits because of the army, right? Yes, they do, despite what they would like to think. Goes both ways, by the way. And that geopolitical influence of the UK is going to increasingly come to depend on Scotland's capacity to project a kinder, softer, and more, well, engaging narrative around the world too. And I would argue that because the both of them are now out of the European Union, London is going to have to get used to the fact that Scotland can also carry a bit of influence out there. And the combination of the both may just be able to ensure that the values that were developed by some of the great thinkers here in Scotland, can continue to resonate in a world that I agree is a very challenging one. One where we will carry the values of liberty, of multilateralism, of peace, and of self-determination. And I'll finish on that.
Speaker for that excellent reply, and thank you to all members of the House who have contributed to this debate. It's now time to call the House to a vote. So, please raise your hand nice and high if you agree with the proposition that Scotland's geopolitical influence is growing.
Oh! Ouch!
You're allowed to raise your hand. You can raise your hand.
Oh, I can raise your hand. Yes, I also can.
That's one half.
Well, yes.
The speaker also
I didn't know the
Oh no, we've had two more. What? Sorry, can you go put your hands up? No. What? We're having no, okay, so we'll do it again, but in future, do not raise your hand after the hands go down. No, raise your hands if you side of the proposition, we'll count again, because I think we had extra hands go up. Yes, we did, yes. So yes, yeah. Okay, please raise your hands if you side with the opposition that it is not growing. Yeah, that's fine. And any abstentions?
Liberals.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Got that one.
Yes. So before we announce the votes, I've got one announcement. Surprisingly, I never get the limelight ever. So I want to thank our sponsor for this evening, which is Scotland's feature series. And a lot of the floor speeches today show that a lot of people have a lot of knowledge about Scotland. So if you're definitely more interested in this, you should look up Scotland feature series, because they've got a lot of good work in terms of podcasts and collaborations that they're doing and with other people around the university. And they aim to develop Scotland's future by showcasing the work of staff and students, and they support projects that enhance discussion and debate on issues pertinent to Scotland's future and enable the university to take leadership on how to meet the challenges of the future. You know that Stephen Gethens, of course, is very, has a book out. There's very good book, so you should all probably read that as well. And you can learn more about their work by looking up on the University webpage if you type in Scotland Feature Series as well. So whilst we're deciding who the best floor speech is, Jenny can go first with board announcements.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Jenny. I'm in charge of the team that organises these events. So if you don't know, we run public debates completely free every Thursday evening. Doors open from 7:30, and we're nearly always in this room. All of our debates next semester are in this room as well, so you always know where to find us. If you'd like to check out some of the other debates that we've run and see some new faces, and you want to see some of the other things that we've done in the past, we do have a YouTube page where we have some of our debates from earlier this semester and years gone by as well, if you'd like to check that out. Our last debate is going to be next week, which is on AI. It's This House Believes that AI does more harm than good. It's going to be really interesting. So if you would like to come along and check that out, we'll be here from 7:30. Debate starts at 8 o'clock. And I look forward to kind of seeing you and chatting with you at social. Then thank you all for coming this evening. It's great to see so many of you.
And William's not here, so Alistair can do competitive announcements.
Okay, hello. I hope you enjoy coming to these public debates, but we also run competitive debate events at 2 PM on Wednesdays at the Union. So the difference is here you can come along and watch the debate, you can give floor contribution. If you want to get more directly involved in debating, thrown in, you get a motion, you get 15 minutes, you have to prepare, you have to just come up with things off your head. If you want to try that out, you can come next Wednesday.
Thank you. And then finally, Freddie.
Hi, two announcements from me tonight. First one, and one you should all know, is it's only 2 more sleeps to the 1794 ball. Just natural. I didn't tell anyone to do that before. If you are coming, if you have got a ticket, you should have hopefully received an email last week or seen it on our Instagram, all of the details of the day and of ticket collection. If you don't know that, or if you have any questions, please come speak to me after the debate. Come to the social and speak to me then. That's how I'll be. And that leads me to my now second announcement, which is of course my usual announcement that I know I'm very self-conscious about, which is that after the debate we'll go to Sandy's Bar in the Union. We'll have our post-debate social. We'll have some drinks, discuss it informally, and just have a good and fun Thursday night. Our speakers are, as always, invited, and I really hope they'll join us for a bit of a discussion. Other than that, we always have a designated sober person, who is, of course, Berta.
Oh no, it's Ines.
Oh, it's Ines? Oh, my apologies.
But I'll be there for a while.
Yeah, designated sober person. And other than that, hopefully we'll see you there.
Joke for the second time. Board announcements are as slick as the North Sea oil that comes from. Anyway, so we'll now announce the votes. So we've had 36 votes cast. So the ayes to the right are 13 and the nays to the left are 17 with 6 abstentions. So congratulations to the opposition for winning the debate.